The core part of this session was about solvency. Now we need to move on and go to an allied but different part component of what we're dealing with, which is audit. Look, audit in itself can be an entire subject. Some could argue an even degree, but we're not going to be able to go to it in that kind of detail. Instead, I just want to give us a bit of an understanding about what audit is and isn't, and also what are some of the key changes that we've seen in the corporate governance landscape over time surrounding audit and its role in effective governance. So why don't we get started on that with an introduction to audit. The first thing to note is that auditing is part of the monitoring process. In an agency theory term, it's a cost of making sure that the external parties, particularly the shareholders, who is who the auditor at least notionally reports to, understand better what's going on in the company. What's really central here is that the auditors are looking at, the external auditors, let's be particular, are looking at the credibility of the financial statements. So they're making sure that what management has put in the financial statements are what management say that they are. So are these statements accurate? Notice it's not about future forecasting or whether we've got a good business or anything like that. It's about saying that the figures are what the figures are. This can lead to several areas of debate. I mean, one of the classic areas of debate is about whether the financial reports are in accordance with the accounting standards and whether they're fair and accurate. Because there's an assumption that those two are the same things, and we can have a discussion about those differences, but they're not necessarily the same thing, some people would argue. A lot of people would argue that they are, but some would argue that they aren't, that you can't actually represent things accurately if you strictly follow the classification system required under particular accounting standards. But again, that's the basis of what the audit is. It's trying to say, look, do these statements actually adhere to the accounting standards that we have so that things are being reported as they should? And are these statements a fair and accurate representation of the financial performance of the company? Because of this difference between assessing whether the figures are accurate and making a statement on how things are going, we can get people who argue that the auditors should have done more. Many times, unless the auditors have actually made a mistake, though, many times that's actually more due to maybe an inaccurate reading of the financial reports. So, for instance, in OneTel, the audited accounts pretty clearly showed that they were going broke, and that wasn't reflected in a market price for a number of reasons that we can talk about. But that disconnection between the market reaction and the financial accounts that were being reported caused a lot of people to question whether the auditors were doing a good enough job as part of their role. That's, of course, one of the cost benefits with audit. You can always do more to verify figures, but when have you actually done enough? That becomes part of the core difficulty when something goes wrong following an audit. That can become even more problematic when there's this expectation gap, as in OneTel, when the market thinks that they're going to do better than what they actually do. And then people look for who caused the failure. One of the things that they look at in particular is the independence of the auditor. So was there any reason for the auditor not to fully and frankly go through the accounts and provide independent advice to the shareholders about the reliability and accuracy of those financial accounts? So what we see is that auditors require two quite different qualities. The first is competence, or the ability to do the job. But the second, and one that has led to a number of significant legislative changes, is independence from managers. Because they're the ones doing the review, they need to be independent and free from bias from management. Let's have a little more look at some of these changes that have occurred around audit. First, there was this very significant report, the Ramsay Report in 2001, and it went to great lengths to set out how a firm should be independent and what kind of relationships should or should not be in place between an auditing firm and an entity. One of the key changes that you can see here was the requirement for the auditor to attend the AGM. So that allowed the shareholders to actually question the auditor. And you'll notice that's a fundamentally kind of different relationship they're trying to set up there. One where they can ask the question directly rather than being filtered through management. There were a number of other significant changes, including ethical rules, educational requirements. But what we started to see with Ramsay was this fundamental strengthening of the independence of the audit function. CLERP 9, the Commonwealth Law and Economics Reform Program number 9, started to embed some of these ideas that followed from Ramsay. It started to look at giving the force of law to what before then were professional standards and provide a stricter oversight of the profession to allow for greater independence or to encourage greater independence. We also see regulation in the latest set of ASX guidelines around how the relationship between the auditor and the company is managed through the use of an audit committee, which has independence and qualification requirements of its members. So it requires directors on the audit committee of a certain sized firm to be independent and have significant qualifications. We also see the ASX trying to get CEOs and CFOs to take greater responsibility for the financial reports by having them declare that the accounts are accurate as well, that it's not just down to the auditor. And we see a few follow-ups to some of the issues started by Ramsay. Look, this current module has really concentrated on the monitoring function, about solvency, about audit. Those things are important. Monitoring's important to good performance, but it's not the be-all and end-all. These are essential building blocks. Solvency in particular is a very specifically required duty of directors under Section 588G, and a very important one because it's about a fundamental nature in terms of the contracts involving the corporation. So for a lot of reasons, it is a critical area of corporate governance, but we've got to put that in context. That is just part of what's necessary if we're going to get effective organisations as well as ones that uphold our necessary financial standards.